Hey there, I'm Carrie, and in this video I'm going to be talking about The Fall of the House of Usher, a short story by Edgar Allan Poe published in 1839. Now, if you're already familiar with this story, you know that it is pretty strange. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to look at. So I've tried for weeks to edit this video and finally decided to break it into pieces. This is going to be a 4-part series. So in this video, I'm going to do a detailed summary. In part 2, we're going to do some analysis. We're going to look at the setting and the major characters. In part 3, we're going to break down some key pieces of text and some important scenes. And part 4 is going to be an extended, in-depth look at the poetry section of this story. That's the portion of the story that's titled The Haunted Palace. I'll link the other 3 videos in this series in the video notes below. I've also got timestamps for this video in the notes, so definitely scroll down, click around, and find exactly what it is you need. All right, without further ado, let's get into The Fall of the House of Usher. Okay, so our story is told by a first-person narrator. We never get this person's name, we don't know where he's from, we just join him as he arrives on the Usher family estate. So the narrator has been summoned to the Usher family estate by his childhood friend Roderick Usher, who has sent him an urgent message. Now, when he comes up on the grounds of the estate and he gets his first look at this house, this old family mansion, he immediately gets creeped out by it. He can't quite put his finger on what, but just something about this view of the house is weird. Something is off about it. The whole thing is just very gloomy. It has an aura of decay and rot around it. He even says that the windows in the mansion look like vacant eyes, which is really weird. There's a small lake, he calls it a tarn, next to the house, but the lake really does not help the place look any more cheerful. It's just kind of dark and still and kind of rotten looking. The house even seems to have its own atmosphere, kind of this gray mist surrounding the whole thing, not just the house, but the lake and the surrounding trees and landscaping. Now, the narrator can tell that this house, the Usher family mansion, is really old, but he can only see it in the details. The house itself is in pretty good condition. The roof hasn't fallen off, nothing is collapsing anywhere. It's just in the details. He can see that the individual stones seem to be crumbling and the whole place is covered with fungi. The only real sign of damage that the narrator can see is a zigzag crack that goes down the front of the house, from the roof all the way down to the foot of the house to the lake. So the narrator has been summoned to the house by a message from his childhood friend, Roderick Usher. This message conveyed that Usher was very sick. He's got some kind of strange, unspecified illness, but he's become very depressed. He just feels beaten down, and he asks the narrator to come and visit him. Come and stay with me, and please help me kind of move out of this. So the narrator answers the summons. He goes to visit Usher. Now, the Usher family, from what the narrator knows, is a very old aristocratic family. Oddly, the family has never branched out. There's no extended Usher family. There are no aunts or uncles or cousins running around in there. There has only been this one single line of descent, and they have always lived in this mansion because there's only this one small group that is the Usher family, and they've always lived in the house. The community around them calls the whole thing the House of Usher. The term is used interchangeably between the house and the family. It is all just the House of Usher. So the narrator finally arrives at the house itself and he goes inside. Not a lot going on in there. For such a big house, it only has 2 servants. The house is full of antiques. Very, very rich furnishings. Not unusual for an old aristocratic family, but again, something about it is just off. It just gives the narrator the creeps for a reason that he can't quite name. He just can't quite put his finger on it. So the narrator makes it to Usher's room, his bedchambers, his sleeping quarters. He goes inside, and it's not any nicer in there. It's very dark. There are windows in the room, but they're really set too high to look out, and they only kind of let this weak reddish light into the room. The floor is black oak. The drapes are dark. All the furnishings are very dark. It's just a very gloomy, sorrowful atmosphere. Well, his old friend, Roderick Usher, is there in the room. And so the narrator comes upon his old friend for the first time in we don't know how many years, and he barely recognizes him. He is absolutely shocked at how much Usher has changed. Usher has a really strange physical appearance. He's classically good looking, but he's not nice to look at because all of his features, his forehead, his nose, his chin, everything is very exaggerated. He's extremely pale and his hair sort of has the texture of spider webs. The narrator quickly notices that Usher is in a very agitated state. He's very nervous, very anxious. He paces around, he's aimless. He seems to have mood swings as well. Everything changes for him very quickly. And Usher believes that his illness is genetic. He calls it a family evil. The symptoms he describes to the narrator are what he calls an over-acuteness of the senses. He's very sensitive to smells. He can only eat bland food. He's sensitive to light. Specific textures really bother him, so he can only wear certain clothes. And noises freak him out. The only noise that he can really tolerate is from stringed instruments like his guitar. In addition to his anxiety, Usher has also become very depressed. He's just overwhelmed by these symptoms, by all the things that he's feeling, and he believes very strongly that he is going to die in this state. Now, as we've seen, Usher is a very anxious person, and he has actually come to believe that his illness is linked to his family home. It's linked to his family mansion. He thinks that his destiny, his life, is tied up in the life of the home, and as the home deteriorates, he deteriorates. But there's something else that is bothering Roderick Usher. He has one living relative, his sister Madeline, and she is also very ill. She's been sick for a long time, and her physicians have given up hope that she is going to recover. They've said this sickness is going to take her. She is going to die. Now, her symptoms are apathy. She's become very disinterested in the things around her. She's become less and less responsive. Also, she's lost a lot of weight. She's getting weaker and weaker, and she has these seizure-like fits that Usher calls catalepsy. Her doctors don't know what to do anymore. They have no idea what this illness could be, and Usher is terrified of this impending loss. While he's telling the narrator about his sister Madeline, she actually passes through the room, but she doesn't even acknowledge her brother and the narrator sitting there. She just walks through. When the narrator sees her, he gets this feeling of alarm and dread. There's something about her that freaks him out. Usher tells the narrator, this is probably the only time you're going to see her. She's in the final stages of her illness, and she's not expected to survive much longer. So the narrator settles in, and he starts doing his best to help his old childhood friend out of this depressed, sorrowful state that Usher has found himself in. He tries to interest him in hobbies, reading, painting, music, but it's not really working. Usher really isn't getting any better. Part of the reason for that is that Usher takes everything to the extreme. He paints, but he can't go outside and paint something nice like the landscape. Instead, he paints these very intense, bizarre scenes. One of them is of this tunnel or vault, and there's just something very off about it. The narrator says it's ghastly. When he reads books, he goes for these books that are sort of disturbing. They have a lot of magical and supernatural elements to them. And when Usher plays on his guitar, he goes on these long, rambling improvs. He even makes up this song called The Haunted Palace, that kind of reflects Usher's own circumstances, what's happening around him. And the narrator is more and more getting the sense that Usher is slowly losing it. He's losing his mind. He is losing his grip on reality. So the narrator has been going about this routine, staying at the Usher family mansion, until one day when Usher comes to him and tells him that Madeline has died. She has succumbed to her illness. So Usher tells the narrator he doesn't want to bury Madeline right away. He is afraid of grave robbers, of body snatchers. Because Madeline suffered from this very mysterious illness, he is nervous that her body may be stolen and sold to a medical school. The narrator thinks this is a pretty reasonable fear, so he goes along with Usher's plan to keep her body in the house for 2 weeks. Usher wants to seal his sister's body in her coffin and keep her body there in the main house in a vault on the lower floor. So the narrator helps Usher carry Madeline's coffin down into this copper-lined vault. It's got a very heavy iron door, and it's actually on a lower floor right beneath the narrator's sleeping quarters right beneath the bedroom that he has been living in. Now they open the coffin one last time so that Usher can take a last look at his sister, and this is the first time the narrator has seen her up close, and it is a weird experience for him. Usher and Madeline look a lot alike. The narrator did not know until this moment that they were twins. Also, Madeline doesn't really look very dead. She's still got some color in her cheeks. She still has almost a smile-like expression on her face. It's very weird to the narrator because she has not taken on the look of a dead body. She looks lifelike. Nevertheless, they screw the lid of the coffin down, they leave it there in this copper tunnel, they close this heavy iron door behind it. Now, over the next few days, Usher's symptoms get much worse. He can't engage with any of his hobbies. He just kind of roams aimlessly around the house. He's even more pale than usual. And the narrator gets the sense that this isn't just grief that is bringing Usher down. It's almost like he has some kind of secret that he is struggling with. And sometimes the narrator catches Usher staring off into space. He says it's like Usher is listening to some imaginary noise. And eventually, over the following days, that mood, that nervous, sleepless mood, starts to infect the narrator as well. He starts to experience some of Usher's symptoms. About a week after they moved Madeline's coffin down into this copper-lined vault on the lower level, a storm rolls in one night. The narrator is not asleep when this storm rolls in. He is nervous, he's awake, he's pacing around his room, and he has started to imagine that he can hear strange noises somewhere in the house. Well, Usher comes to the narrator's room and he is almost hysterical. He is on the verge of panic. He goes over to the window, he pulls it open even though there's this terrible storm, they call it a tempest, going on outside. There's a terrible storm and he points outside, and even though they cannot see any moonlight or starlight, it seems like the house and the land surrounding it and even the lake are glowing. They have this weird, unnatural light around them. Usher seems to think it is something supernatural, but the narrator tries to assure him, no, this is an electrical phenomenon. It's because of this terrible thunderstorm. Please stop looking at it. He shuts the door. He gets Usher to sit down and he says, look, I'm going to read a book for us to distract us. We'll pass the time during this terrible storm. So the narrator grabs the first book he can find. It's called The Mad Tryst of Sir Lancelot Canning. That's the author's name. And it's this sort of medieval epic adventure with a hero named Ethelred that goes on a quest. So in the climax of this story, The Mad Tryst, a terrible storm has come upon the hero, this knight Ethelred, and he has to break down the door of a house where a hermit is hiding inside. When the narrator gets to that portion of the story where Ethelred breaks through this door, he imagines he can hear the sound of breaking wood, like of splintering wood somewhere in the house. He's pretty certain that he heard it. He tries to ignore that, gets back to the story. Next, in The Mad Tryst, the hero Ethelred encounters a dragon that roars and screams. And as the narrator reads this part of the book, he hears a grating, screaming noise from somewhere in the house. Again, he tries to ignore it, tries to focus on the book. Next, in The Mad Tryst, the hero Ethelred reaches for a metal shield that is up on the wall, but the shield falls and hits the floor. Just as the narrator reads this, he hears a metallic clanging from somewhere in the house. Now he's absolutely sure he heard it, but he is trying to ignore it. He is trying to act like everything is normal and natural so that Usher will stay calm. Usher isn't really listening to him at this point, though. He has actually turned his chair away from the narrator and he has his chair facing the bedroom door. He's got his chin sort of down upon his chest, and the narrator sees his lips moving like he's talking to himself. He's whispering to himself. And the narrator comes closer to hear what it is that Usher is whispering, and the news is not good. Usher is saying, we have put her living in the tomb. He's talking about Madeline. He believes that they have buried her alive. All of these imaginary noises that the narrator has caught him paying attention to, Usher believes that he heard Madeline moving around in her coffin, and that these noises, the splintering wood and the clanging metal, are her finally breaking out of her coffin and getting out of this copper tunnel where they have laid her to rest. Usher tells the narrator, I can hear the beating of her heart. She's on her way right now. I can hear her coming up the stairs. She is coming after me for doing this to her, for burying her alive. He finally screams at the narrator. She is outside the bedroom door. At that moment, the bedroom door does swing open and Madeline is there. She's still dressed in her burial clothes, these white burial robes that are blood-stained now, and she looks like she's been in some kind of terrible struggle. Madeline staggers into the room and she collapses on her brother. Both of them are dead by the time they hit the floor. Now the narrator is done at this point. He does not call for the servants. He does not stop to check their pulse. He just makes a run for it. He is getting out of this house. Before he is clear of the shadow of the house, the whole landscape around him, that has been dark. It's the middle of the night. There's a terrible storm going on. The landscape lights up and he turns around to see that it is moonlight. That crack, that barely visible crack down the house, has split wider and moonlight is shining through it and lighting up the landscape. That crack gets wider and wider until the house completely breaks apart and collapses. Last bit of the story, there was a long, tumultuous shouting sound like the voice of 1,000 waters, and the deep and dark tarn at my feet closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the House of Usher. The end. Now, if you're ready to start on some analysis, go ahead and meet me in part 2. I hope something in here was helpful to you. If it was, please like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when the next story or poem becomes available. If you had a different story in mind or a particular author that you're interested in, definitely drop that in the comments and I will see what I can do. Best of luck to you, and I'll see you in the next chapter.